Hello, hello. This is Irene with SaugaTalks. Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. I know you're watching us on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on X. You're listening to our podcast on all the major podcasting platforms. So today is an amazing day for me because for me here, the absolutely esteemed, wonderful, full of experience panel of experts. We're going to be talking about AI, agentic AI, AI at the enterprise, and just about the world that AI is changing around us. So Ben Pring with me. How are you, Ben?
I'm good, Irene. How are you doing?
Absolutely. I'm doing wonderful. Paul Roehrig with me. Paul, how are you?
I'm very well. Thank you very much, Irene.
Thank you for joining. Malcolm, Frank, amazing. Thank you for joining the group of friends that you've been working with and me here at SaugaTalks. How are you?
I'm great. And Irene, that panel you talked about sounded fabulous. So I'm just wondering when they're going to show up.
Fantastic, fantastic. So, gentlemen, not wasting any moment, okay? We announced the topic will be agentic AI in the enterprise, transforming business at its core. Okay, I expect us to talk about business, the core of business, okay, and the most shiny, promising trends right now we are seeing. So, to me, it is agentic AI. To me, I want to learn more. And that's why I use this platform to understand more and to share with the world more. Ben, why don't we start with you? What's your understanding out there? Okay, we read a lot, we consume a lot, and yet people still wondering what this agentic AI is.
Yes, no, it's a hot topic at the moment. You're quite right, Irene. And I think from the perspective that I sort of look at things, and Malcolm and Paul will jump in as well, I'm sure. This is a kind of natural evolution of what's been going on for a while. Clearly, AI, LLMs, whatever language you kind of sort of agree on to call this thing or these things. I mean, it's been developing for a long period of time. With the three of us wrote a book in 2017 called "What to Do When Machines Do Everything," which was about the state of AI at that stage, and it was very much a reaction to what Demis Hassabis at DeepMind had been doing with playing against humans, people playing Go. And, we saw then that this was going to be a very, very big deal in an enterprise context, in a business context. It wasn't just a gaming thing. It wasn't just a kind of sci-fi and movies thing. And so AI has a long backstory even before 2017, clearly. As that evolution has continued, as the technologies become more powerful, as the underlying horsepower of the machines, NVIDIA chips, etc., driving this thing have become more powerful, we've got to this next evolutionary stage of agentic. And whilst that definition is sort of imprecise at the moment, and people sort of talk about this, and it probably means different things to different people, I think at the core of it is this notion that the software can become more proactive. It can become more unsupervised, if you like, rather than giving it very prescribed, discrete steps, do X. Now you can just say much more broadly, go and do X plus, whatever, 10, X10, X100. You can give them a much more loosely defined goal, and the software can then go and act proactively within that goal to try and find an answer. Sort of the simple examples that people are talking about at the moment is, in a way, it's quite funny that we're using this language, an agent. We used to, a million years ago, some people may remember, we used to go to a travel agent to book our vacation. So now you can say to the software, I want to go to a nice golf resort somewhere in the Caribbean, go and find that for me, book it for me, do all of the individual steps that one could have done before browsing and sort of doing yourself. Now you can ask the machine to be much more proactive in the response to that request. So it's really an evolutionary step. I don't think it changes anything fundamentally other than that the software is becoming more powerful, more able, and more able to help us in the work that we sort of do.
Paul, in your opinion, okay, agentic AI, right? What triggers in your mind first thing, and how would you explain in simple terms what are we dealing with?
Yeah, so I mean that we're all sort of grasping for a metaphor, right? And so I don't know if we've painted ourselves into a little bit of a corner using the notion of agentic. But I think the simplest way, when we talk to clients specifically about what we do, which is around software engineering and the software engineering lifecycle, it's basically being able to take work that we're very familiar with, right? And whether it's testing or software development or data management, and breaking it down into much more discrete bits of work, right? So right now we have people that do stuff, right? If you're testing, for example, right, you're a tester, right? And you test the code and you make sure that the quality is high. And what this notion of agentic AI does is if you take that down and break it into its constituent steps, and then move certain of those steps to, as Ben said, to that software, right? That right now we're calling an agent. If you string enough of those agents together, basically that process becomes modernized and you get still a person in the loop. There's still humans there, but the agents help that human become much, much more effective. And also to Ben's point, as we're maturing right now, that software is taking over more and more of that work. So that engineer, in that case, the tester, becomes much, much more productive. You get better software. The work gets done a lot faster. There's more transparency. So if you're a CIO or a CTO, hopefully you're sleeping better at night because you know how the work is being done, right? And so that's really the promise of this, right? And so that's what everybody wants, right? There's this economic benefit. There's this elevation of productivity and innovation and transparency. You're freeing up people to do more impactful work, rather than kind of the mundane work that maybe we wouldn't prefer to be doing. So those are the benefits that are baked in, right? So that's the promise. And so I think kind of that's becoming more and more solid in terms of our common understanding. But what's really interesting now is it's starting to happen, right? So we're taking this, like Ben said, we wrote these books, years ago, but now it's coming true, right? And it's coming true very, very fast. And that's the exciting part. That's the fun part, is these, what we're calling agents, are elements of AI that are allowing us to move work to software to improve productivity, experiences, transparency, velocity, and innovation. That's been the promise. But right now, the wave is beginning to crest, and companies are going, holy moly, there's something really powerful here, and I can begin to implement it. And that's what's happening today, and that's why it's really exciting.
Malcolm, in your opinion, right, agentic, what does it mean for all of us? Yep.
I'll just put it into 2 words, a digital worker. And that has profound, so that's the way you should think about an agent. And currently I'm running Talent Genius, and what we do, it's in the name of the company. We help talent work with the genius of AI. So we match individual workers, mostly in tech and in knowledge jobs, to the right agents where they can 10x their output. And so if you're an individual, we help you with that. Or if you are a corporation looking at a problem set, you have an RFP, a project plan, we can help you say, if we used humans traditionally, this is how we'd solve the problem. But if we created teams of agents plus people, then how could we solve that problem in a completely new way? So that's our definition of it. It makes everything up for grabs. The way we define each of these roles, whether you're a software developer, a designer, a management consultant, a data analyst, you can go through the entire list, how that job is defined and delivered in 2024 versus what it's going to be in 2030, there's going to be a chasm. It's going to be a fundamental shift. And so the sooner that people understand that and prepare themselves for it, the better.
Amazing. Okay, we've heard a lot. Okay, to me, what resonated with it, our opening line, so to speak, is evolution, right? How we got where we are, what it means, right, in practical terms, and at the same time, what are the challenges and opportunities? So, Ben, back to you in terms of, can we scratch the surface a little bit? Okay, meaning that how leaders, technical, both technical and business, because line is blurred as far as I understand. Okay, how they consume that's happening right now, how they consume this technology evolution that we're experiencing.
Yeah, I think we're beginning to see this, Irene, in large organizations as they think about their staffing plans. the existing as is, if you like, and then what this potential future may look like. I'm certainly of the opinion that that hiring is going to be impacted in the short term in the context of a reduction in the need to hire. I don't think people are going to start cutting back. If you've got a team of 1,000 technology people at the moment, I'm not imagining. It'd be interesting to hear what Paul and Malcolm think about this. I'm not imagining people are going to cut back their teams and replace them with the digital worker that Malcolm talked about. But I think it may slow their new hiring as they continue to grow, because, as Paul said, the productivity of the individual increases. So one person will be able to using the technology, do the work of 1.5 people. So that reduces the need to hire by 50% in that role. So I think that's what people with this executive power, as you say, on the technology side or on the business side, are at a relatively early stage of thinking through. What does that mean from a growth perspective, from a talent perspective, from a staffing perspective? And clearly there is a lot of experimentation going on in the market at the moment, using these tools, trying to inject them into the life cycle, as Paul was talking about. I think we're at a relatively early stage of that. And whilst the language has changed, this is in a way the work that people have been trying to figure out for some time. I think the power of the tools that we're beginning to see, and the shock that the tools are coming from some unlikely places, is very, very difficult for people to get their head around. The power, the geopolitics of this, to start introducing that thought into this conversation, that's a very, very big deal to try and get your head around. But the pragmatic work that people are doing, 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, is this trying to figure out how you inject this technology into the workflow and how you re-engineer that workflow to accommodate the upside potential of this new digital worker.
Yeah, but Ben, you're right. It is starting with hiring, but it's moving pretty quick, because the hiring markets, you got to look at the canary in the coal mine, which is contractors. It first starts with contractors, then it goes new hires, and then if you have excess capacity, you have to lay people off. If you look at the contracting market for two markets, one is web developers and then software developers. In the last 6 months, they both collapsed.
Yeah.
So the data is really quite shocking. And so that's always the first to move. So it's an indicator, an early indicator, that when you adopt these tools, the productivity of folks in those roles have gone up, which means the demand per person is starting to go down.
Yeah.
Paul,
that's a very good, just to add on to Malcolm's point, that the other canary in the coal mine around and what we're focusing on in our company is around software engineering, productivity in that life cycle. The other early canary in the coal mine, the early warning indicator, or maybe not a warning indicator, it may be like, this is a positive indicator of impact, is in the technology, the high tech space. So you've got companies like Amazon and Google and Salesforce and these others that are doing exactly what Malcolm was saying. They're in some cases there's maybe some job cuts, but more likely is job freezes in the expectation of higher productivity. So it's key to remember that software is going to get more important, not less important, right? And so the idea of a job cataclysm, I think, is a bit overplayed, right? And we talked about that in some of the work that we've done the three of us have done in the past. However, both Malcolm and Ben and I, have said, we've all said, how the work gets done is going to change dramatically, right? And so the level of productivity improvement is starting to show up, and you're seeing that in statements from Amazon and Google and others, right? So that is absolutely happening. Malcolm's exactly right.
What about some hurdles? Because leaders with budgets, executives, board members, they tend to be very conservative in terms of investing large in things that are not quite proven yet. So what are you seeing out there, Ben? Hurdles to adapt, hurdles to change, basically.
Why don't Malcolm and Paul take that one?
I see two big hurdles that are starting. One is the lawyers. When the lawyers show up, you're in trouble. But This is in large companies. It's procurement, and the legal departments are stepping in and saying, whoa, 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 let's slow down. We have to understand, if we have a third-party agent, exactly what data is it consuming? How is it architected? What are the IP rights around that? And so even though it may have really, really high potential for driving unit level productivity, the suits are showing up and starting to stop a lot of initiatives. There's something fascinating that's occurring. I was talking about contractors before. If you look demographically at who is using agents the fastest, it's small companies and individual contractors, because they don't have those constraints, but they are highly, highly motivated to 2x, 3x their output. So in the past, large corporations were where the cool stuff happened. We're now starting to see, at least with early agent adoption, there's an inverse relationship, and I think it's because of the legal staff. A second is mindset, what Peter Drucker talked about, which is a theory of the business. You get senior executives that may have been 20 years, 25 years in their career, and they have a mental model of how processes work. And all of a sudden, this new technology comes where you do need to completely reconceptualize or re-engineer it, and they don't think that way. So they're sort of gluing these tiny AI solutions. I think of them as remora fish going on to the large corpus. It doesn't change the underlying process. It doesn't move metrics that matter, but they'll convince themselves, they'll go home at night going, oh, I'm so cool, I'm doing AI stuff. But there's a word for that. You're called a loser. You're going to be called a market loser in 3 or 4 years with that mentality, and you won't see the change coming. We've seen this in prior cycles, in certain pockets of the internet economy some 20 years ago. It's going to happen at scale this time around. And so those managers need to work hands-on personally with agents around workflows and processes that they understand deeply. And then they can see the power of these and recognize the way we've architected our business, our financial model, our organizational model is actually wrong.
Paul, you have something to add, I'm sure.
Well, yeah, it's just I think Malcolm said it exactly right. I mean, one of the things that I think is going to help us leap those hurdles, right? Which I think this is an opportunity-rich environment, right? I really think that this is going to make a lot of lives and a lot of businesses a lot better. But you're right, there are hurdles, right? And so whether they're legal or mindset or what I would call more of a lack of imagination, I think one of the forcing functions is going to help us climb over those hurdles. It's just the economic imperative, which is starting to become real. Now, it is early days, right? So I'm not saying like, hey, this is, completely clear shot from here to there. But when you see these amazing quotes, like Google is now generating, according to Sundar a couple of months ago, more than a quarter of all new code at Google is generated by AI, right? And then another quote that was kind of jaw-dropping is from Andy Jassy the CEO of Amazon. He said that using their AI assistants in software engineering has saved the equivalent of 4,500 developer years, right? So even if that's, maybe inflated a little bit or a little bit, optimistic, it's an amazing impact in the software engineering space. And I think that, a lot of what's happening right now and what we're seeing in our company is clients are coming to us and saying, hey, look, we want help figuring out how do we get over the hurdles that Malcolm called out, right? And the economic imperative, right? That productivity benefit that AI can deliver in the software space is going to help a lot of companies, right? So the lawyers are right? They need to say, look, we need to think about how these things are managed and how are you keeping humans in the loop and how are you ensuring ethics and compliance? And that's absolutely correct. But the economic imperative, that groundswell of like, the lawyers have a point, right? But so does the CFO. And I think that's where this is becoming an engine for change that a lot of companies are just beginning to explore. But I agree with Malcolm. This is going to happen a lot faster than any of the other shifts in big enterprise IT that we've seen in the last, 50 years, really.
My favorite discussion, about enterprise is about legacy systems, It's less interesting. People kind of tend to forget about it because this is day to day, right? Let's talk about new, innovative, shiny things, right? But let's bring people back to reality in a way how agentic or any AI or any new platform pretty much, right? How do people integrate it? And again, speaking to points that Malcolm mentioned, right? They tend to have a little shiny band-aids, little, I don't know, projects here and there with AI saying that we're golden, all right? Where is this big integration, where this big change is happening? Malcolm, if you want to start.
Sure. Look, this is where the three of us have spent too many collective years. It's a bit embarrassing to add them all up at this point, but I think as a panel, we have great credibility on this topic. And you're absolutely right, Irene. Let's just pick one, an airline. So name your favorite, well, if there is such a thing as a favorite airline, I don't know if that's an oxymoron, but they have their flight maintenance systems, flight operations, baggage handling, reservations, frequent flyers. Those things, they are afraid to touch them. And so you're exactly right. They consume so much time and energy and budget. And then anything new you want to build has to be built atop those. So that is where they're handicapped. But there's something fascinating going on with AI and agentic AI is that you can now modernize those legacy systems for pennies on the dollar. And some of the fastest growing IT services firms I'm now seeing are those that are going after application modernization with AI tools. And so a project to modernize one of those, to move it to the cloud, to clean up the functionality, to clean up the look and feel, make it feel like modern software, typically would take a team of about 12 engineers, 6 months, several $1 million. And those firms, that airline just couldn't find the budget to do that because you had to multiply that 20 times. So they just said, let's just leave this alone. You can now use agents to address that problem. I'm seeing it now with about 3 people in 3 weeks. It has completely collapsed the time where you can then modernize the backbone to really get an AI-ready enterprise backbone. So it's fascinating, Irene, that the thoughtful firms are now spending energy not on the bright new shiny object that will be manage a completely new process or introduce a completely new product. They're going the opposite direction to go after that legacy that you're describing. And it does 2 things. Number 1 is that you can clean that up. Number 2, you self-fund your transition because you're no longer spending all that money on those dead costs. And there's actually a third attribute here that the internal IT organization can learn. They understand not just the tools, but the governance, the associated methodologies, the associated skill sets. So it's counterintuitive, but the most thoughtful IT organizations are going after those legacy apps.
Paul, please step in. Okay, modernization, legacy, and AI.
That's exactly. Well, I'll give Malcolm the 4th in 3 weeks or 4 weeks. So, yeah. So we're one of those companies, and so we're doing. It wasn't an airline, but there's a bank. So Malcolm's exactly right. It is a new way to do things to fix problems that may have been languishing, literally for decades. So in our case for a financial services company, they were running 900,000 lines of code that had been written 40 years ago. And Malcolm explained it perfectly well. This was inhibiting agility, compliance, all kinds of problems, their banker customer experience. And so we were able, using agentic AI, we were able to go in and do it in 1/3 the time for half the cost. So suddenly something that had been impossible to do literally for decades, it wasn't like they didn't know, like, hey, this is a problem. They knew it was a problem. It was just impossible to fix. And so agentic AI applied to workflows in the software engineering space, in the enterprise, right? That becomes, we talk about low-hanging fruit as a cliche, but it's solving a real problem, a real legacy problem that almost every enterprise has, where there's a problem that was too expensive to solve in 2024, but in 2025, 6, 7, now it's completely possible.
Ben, what's your take? Is that real game changer, another cliche for business, that you can modernize, less cost, less entry barrier, right? And just bigger results faster?
Well, yes, we used to joke that, Y2K, if you can remember that far back, proved to us that old software never died. It just, as Malcolm says, just got built on top of, and then you drilled down into it one day and you found oil down there somewhere. I think not to put a political point on this at all, or introduce the subject of politics, but we're seeing a real time example of exactly what the guys are talking about right now in what the Musketeers are doing, finding all this incredible legacy technology running government departments in the US, and realizing that this technology is, how can one put it politely, clunky at best, and full of issues and challenges. And for all the reasons Malcolm and Paul have been talking about, people have been too scared to sort of touch this stuff for generations, and clearly it's outdated, clearly it's dysfunctional, clearly there's huge amounts of wastage, if not worse, within those systems. And with traditional models, there was no way of breaking out of that legacy debt, technology debt. There was no way of breaking out of that cycle. The average tenure of a CIO is roughly around 18 months. Certainly in the commercial enterprise space, probably longer in the public sector. But what that means psychologically is, you inherit this mess, and you frankly don't have enough time to actually do anything about it. All you can do is keep the thing rolling, keep the thing moving along, and hope people don't scream too loudly at you. That's really the story of technology in big businesses writ large for as long as we've all been doing this. So is this a moment now in which we can break that cycle and change that? Well, the Musketeers seem to be, again, as a lead indicator, showing that potentially there is a way to do that. I mean, this is really the early stage of the digital transformation that we've been talking about. You've been talking about, Irene, for a long time, the digital transformation of public sector, public services. And there's a long way to go, and it's all going to get clouded with the next level, a layer of bureaucracy and politics. And it's not to say that this is a slam dunk, but it does seem to be now a new opportunity, a new moment of opportunity, if you like, to look at things with a fresh eye. Maybe one of the smartest things an LLM or an agentic piece of software could do at the moment is learn COBOL.
That's huge. That's huge. Okay, we all live long enough to know that COBOL programmers are still golden. Okay, because the whole enterprise.
Well, they are literally, the last of the COBOL programs. They are beginning to die out, and the new generation isn't learning that stuff. It's not cool to learn. So if this software can figure this stuff out and then bury into this, prehistoric software down there, maybe that's the way this plays out.
Yeah, Ben still gets his kicks out of kicks.
Exactly. And yet we all adapting, we all learning, we're adapting, we just, I don't know, learning to think differently, if you wish. Malcolm, how about starting kind of series of disastrous examples? Okay, I love pitfalls, disasters, and hopefully some advices how to avoid them. Any examples come to your mind, something that we can remember this conversation?
It's yes. One that comes to mind, I won't name who the organization is, but it's a top 20 company in the US. If you have all worked with this firm, you know who it is. And they went with the notion of proprietary data equals proprietary advantage. And so as about 18 months ago, when LLMs were really come to the fore, they were thinking, let's build our own LLM, and that will be the moat that we'll build this business around in the AI economy. Sound idea until they figured out it would take about $700 million to create Gen 1 of that. And then they would always, by definition, be forever behind all of the competition. So when you look at DeepSeek and what's come out recently, could you imagine a publicly traded company? What would they tell their shareholders if they had spent $700 million that they just had to throw away? So there's an important lesson there of what you should build versus what the market should build. And in line with that, I think we all have to redefine what is the line between people and software. And this is going to manifest when I talk about theory of the business, like what is your business model? So let me just get to IT services. The industry drives me nuts because a lot of the leaders there, and I was one of them, are a bit hypocritical blowhards in that they will tell everybody you're going to get Amazoned, you're going to be digitized, you're going to be transformed, and yet they never transformed themselves. Because the business model for those companies is classically a 40-20-20. You had 40% gross margins, 40% SG&A, and then you created 20% or 20% SG&A and then 20% margins. That line is going to be completely redrawn because software is going to be able to do so much of what people did. And so that space, are you going to give those gross margins to your client? Or are you going to keep them for yourself? How are you going to deliver? So that change management that firms are going to go through is going to be exceptionally hard, particularly for firms that are publicly traded, because they don't want to follow Moore's law. Hardware and software firms understand this deeply, but mere mortal companies, whether they're services firms or most of the Fortune 500, doesn't understand that. And so this, to me, is going to be the biggest challenge of how to navigate through that. So it's, number one, what do you consume from the market? And then what do you build yourself? People have yet to truly figure that out. And then number two, how is that going to change my business model and my financial model? Similarly, folks have yet to truly figure that out as well.
Paul, yes, disasters, okay. Anything comes to your mind from your experience? Disasters, pitfalls, okay, and advice how to avoid major ones. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think the biggest disaster is happening in a lot of companies, actually. I think the biggest disaster that will have the longest term impact is, and Malcolm brought it up earlier in terms of what's the mindset for the firm. There are companies that are still almost, it's not head in the sand. I mean, nobody's kind of trying to avoid this, but it's almost a paralysis. I think the things that Malcolm said are exactly right. I think those are the things that leadership, boardrooms, and C-suites in all of these major enterprises ought to be pivoting towards solving that problem. What is the new theory of the firm, where software is doing more of the work, right? And how do we redraw those lines? I think that is true regardless of industry. Everyone needs to be thinking about that. That is one of the most important things, because the real disaster is the opportunity that's going to be lost, right? So it's easy to look at, oh, these guys messed this up, so don't do that, right? And that's important, right? But I think the real fear that I have is people are just going to sit back and maybe lose what could be important assets, important benefits to all of us, to work in society and our lives, by not taking the right steps to be able to redraw that line in terms of workflows, plus where is software going to take over more and more of the work, and where do humans have a long-standing advantage with curiosity and empathy and the ability to apply ethics, those just advanced decision making, right? The machines are not going to be able to do that anytime soon, right? We can debate about that over a beer, but right now they don't. And that's kind of the biggest kind of building problem, I think. The other thing that we've talked about is how, for example, we've mentioned COBOL, right, which is, right, that's kind of fun to talk about, but the agents are already starting to do that, right? They are already starting to disintermediate the requirement for COBOL programmers, because that is becoming agentified, right? And so the ability to step back and reimagine the lines between humans and software, right, in your specific workflows, and start with IT, right? Malcolm talked about the IT services providers. That's absolutely true. It's absolutely being disrupted. And, hopefully, maybe I'm a blowhard, but I don't think I'm a hypocrite, because I did go to Ascendion to be able to do exactly that. That's one of the things that our company is founded on, is, we're privately held. He's exactly right. It's a lot easier to be agile when you're, smaller, and, and I think that the companies, there is a growing cohort of service providers that are trying to disrupt that industry, exactly as Malcolm and Ben have talked about, by moving more of that work to software, delivering that as a value back to clients. And so that's exactly what we're doing.
Ben, why don't we start the new kind of thread here is about, to me, business core, okay, and business models, okay? That's kind of very interesting. I'm so passionate about seeing what's available, because it looks like, again, I'm speaking to a lot of, I don't know, startup founders, right? A lot of enterprise leaders. They're not quite believers yet. Okay, that business core and business models changing right easily. And we just talk about simple processes, but no, the center of the business. Where do you think we're going with this, Ben?
Well, I think, again, at the risk of introducing a history lesson into the conversation, I think you can draw historical lessons from the last big technology paradigm shift, the emergence of the cloud, 20, 25 plus years ago. Which obviously was an evolution of what the internet enabled, and now we're really going back into history. But if you think about the commercialization of the World Wide Web, and when regular normal people and normal businesses began to use that technology, and then the emergence of a whole new generation of firms, both in the services space and the software space, it took a few years. There was a sort of a period of evolution. There was an interregnum between business models and approaches that were based on a pre-internet era and then a post-internet era. And I think we're right in the middle of that moment now. And I'm looking out for and beginning to see examples of small companies in both the software development space, in the services space, and the agentic space itself, who are beginning to emerge now. And what that means, if you put it from the buy side, and Irene, you're sort of talking about the enterprise space, is that at the moment, if I'm the CIO of a big shop, I've got the traditional options. I've got a menu of options, a traditional approach, and then I've got a small number of new approaches. That's still very risk weighted to the old, because the new is still so unproven. As new firms emerge and become more known and have more success stories to talk about, I think the choice that I have begins to equalize a little bit more, and I can start to introduce those into my environment in a kind of more risk managed way. So I think we're at this interesting moment when, as we've all been sort of saying, the theory that we've been talking about for 10 plus years is now becoming real, and there's a whole generation of new software, new services that's going to emerge from the startup community in the next few years, because again, they can create their solution at a much cheaper price point because of all the reasons we've been talking about, and that becomes a very attractive value proposition in the marketplace. I think that's still, that sort of Cambrian explosion is happening in front of us at the moment, but it has still, again, got a ways to go before we see the sort of next Amazon, the next Salesforce that emerge as a native LLM, native agent-based company that can take on the incumbents, the established players, and really present the alternative, so the CIO can say, yeah, I'll go that route rather than the traditional route that I understand.
Welcome. Yeah, what do you see is happening? Business models, LLMs. Yeah, what to expect?
Ben's right. And another way of categorizing your question, the disasters, the biggest disasters we haven't yet seen. And it's because management teams didn't take this seriously enough and aren't moving fast enough right now, and they're going to ruin their franchises. So just to pick up what Ben was talking about, if you were asked, you had to put down a real bet, $5,000 on who's going to win the cloud wars in circa 2005, 2010.
I've been there. I know what you're talking about.
And if somebody said, here are your choices, Irene, your choices, Irene, are IBM, Oracle, the bookstore, the crappy PowerPoint and Xbox outfit, or the search firm. Those
It
were your
amazes me every day, Malcolm, this exact point. Okay, who would have thought that
Exactly.
Amazon becomes a major dominant player?
But why isn't IBM worth $2 trillion of market cap today? Because they should be. They had every advantage for the cloud, except they didn't take it seriously because they were trapped in that mental model. So this may sound ethereal, what we're talking about, but I also saw it in IT services that building mobile apps, when there was the explosion of the iPhone and every CXO wanted those apps from their company on an iPhone, the GSIs, the systems integrators, were hopeless at doing that. And these Eastern European firms came out of quote unquote nowhere, whether it was EPAM, Endava, Globant from Latin America. They owned that market. And by the time the GSIs woke up, they couldn't compete. The opportunity was gone. So we are going to see that get repeated tenfold, 20-fold, 50-fold in the next 5 years, because certain management teams are pulling an IBM that everybody around them is saying, this is the greatest tech shift we've ever seen, but they don't fully internalize exactly what does that mean for my product set. And the problem is they always look inside out. They start with their product set, with their services, with their cost base, as opposed to outside in. What is the art of the possible? What does the market really need? Where is this leading us? And then how do we build to that? And so we're belaboring this point, but it is so fundamentally important, because you see it now, where in my travels, a lot of executives who give lip service to this, but they don't understand it from a first principle standpoint, and they aren't taking appropriate action against it.
Paul, in your mind, what are we dealing with?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of the points that Ben and Malcolm were putting forth. I think, whether it's a Cambrian explosion or some sort of extinction event for kinds of companies, in multiple sectors, the thing that I keep coming back to is what's going to prevent that, right? What's going to prevent the kind of an enterprise catastrophe? And I think, Malcolm said, it comes back to the theory of the firm, being able to step back, look at how you're creating value today, and then examining the art of the possible in terms of where software, now powered and enhanced by AI, broken up into agents along a workflow. How does that reconstitute the value chains that you have as a pharmacy or a bank or a retail company or a software engineering company? I think that's exactly what is the responsibility of boardrooms and C-suites everywhere. I think that is the new, what's the new thing? I think it's that thing. And then it does fall to IT, right? We know that from the data that we're looking at, as well as clients that we're talking to every day. It is the CIO and the CTO that everybody's looking at and going, okay, now what do we do? Right? And being able to look at, within the purview of technology, how is software reconstituting work? How is it creating value? And then being able to say, given that is true and not likely to get, that's not changing, right? That's only going to get more important. Software is only going to get more important. It is the beginning of the true digital revolution. So now what? And that's where the promise of agentic AI does come in. I think that's exactly true. Is it early days? Absolutely. Are things going to go wrong? Absolutely. But the most wrong thing anybody can do in a leadership position right now is nothing. Right? I think that's the big, if I'm going to leave you with one thing, it's that. Don't do nothing. Right? Because these things, these tools are powerful. It is a change that we're all going to have to embrace, right? Or flee from, right? Candidly. So if you want to do that, fine, but that's not fun. I think now is the time to take the opportunity to be able to look at this, redraw the line between humans and software, figure out how you can be 10x, 20x, 50x more productive with the spend that you have, and become that kind of company that succeeds in this agentic AI and this AI powered world. I think that's the fun part right now.
Ben, could you answer the question I didn't ask? Okay, something that's on your mind based on the conversation we're having. what haven't we touched yet? What area, what angle we didn't bring up yet? I can name a few, but I'm interested what's on your mind.
No, I think we've talked about a lot of stuff, Irene. Again, I think the context into which all of this discussion really sits is about the fact that the technology that we're all talking about and we're all experiencing, we're seeing either in domestic lives, personal lives, or in a work context, is clearly on a incredible exponential curve at the moment. And to imagine that in a year's time it isn't even more impactful strikes me as sort of unlikely at the moment. And so you put this into the context that, all of us and probably most of the people listening to this now have worked all of our lives in the technology industry. So we're a very technology-centric out view of the world. But the reality is that as an industry, if you put the technology industry as a percentage of global GDP, it's still 5%, 6%, 7% of the world. There's a huge upside opportunity for technology to grow, to become much more significant in so many different aspects of our world. Alex Karp from Palantir's book that came out yesterday, people should read that, because this is the argument he's making. Software is going to infuse its way into so much more of our world. And so this debate about the digital worker taking work away from the humans, within that broader context, the pie getting larger, there's so much opportunity for so many people in so many different aspects of our world. And I think that element of this discussion is sort of underemphasized. Mr. Nadella was making this argument the other day when DeepSeek, hit, and it's true. And again, I think people in technology sort of assume that technology is the world. The reality is technology is still a relatively small part of the world, but is set to become a much, much bigger part of our world in the rest of our lifetimes. And there's tremendous opportunity if one can, as Malcolm and Paul are talking about, change one's mentality, change one's business models, adapt, evolve. There's tremendous upside for that. And I think a lot of people miss that part of the discussion. Is probably the most important part of this discussion.
Welcome. Question I didn't ask. If you have an answer, something that we haven't yet.
The question is, when does an executive, quote unquote, get it? And it's interesting. I mean, too many of them are dismissive. They're saying, look, we're 2 years in, and yeah, NVIDIA was a great stock, and these LLMs keep leapfrogging each other. But as best I could tell, this is a glorified search. Who cares? Where they get agent pilled, if that's a term, is, I mentioned this earlier, go into an area you understand very, very deeply. However you grew up as an executive, so if it's software development, if it's sales, marketing, consulting, whatever it is, and find an agent that focuses on that space. Let me give you an example. I've seen this one firm has agent pilled several sales executives. It's called AnyBiz. So AnyBiz, it's an Israeli firm. It's an agent that does top of funnel prospecting. So it's just cold calling, outreach, and you want to get people interested in your company or in your product. There are salespeople that do that, or there are sales companies that you can just hire, a contractor to do that for you, and they're going to manually have their lists and just reach out to people. And if they produce 10 leads a month, that's pretty good value for that money. One of these people who got to work with AnyBiz, he referred to it as my her moment. Remember the movie when there's that one-to-one relationship, and at the end, it's like, well, how many partners do you have? And hers said something like 14,000. And Joaquin Phoenix, it just blew his mind because he thought it was one-to-one. That's what AnyBiz does, meaning that the platform is so powerful, it is actually frightening, because you think it may become like a runaway freight train. It will look at review on outreach. It has a listing, and it knows how to contact tens and tens of thousands of executives. it will do research on the company that they work at. So what are the biggest issues? It'll read the annual report. It'll read the quarterly earnings, what's in the news. It will then read everything that that person has put out on LinkedIn or social media. It recognizes their Myers-Briggs profile, is able to understand the language and the issues that are going to resonate most with them. And then it starts going, and it creates a persona, and it starts the outreach. And then it learns as it goes. It understands, where am I getting the most feedback? Where am I getting the most positive results, so forth and so on. So it, at scale, gets smarter and smarter and smarter as it starts to drive your campaign. The scale and the specificity that that platform has is really, really mind-boggling. So that's just one area. This is being multiplied against dozens of workflows, dozens of processes across corporations. So I wanted to spend time on that, because when I've seen people, the light bulb goes off and they start taking the right steps, it's when they get very close to an agent in an area or a workflow that they understand deeply. So I would strongly encourage folks to do that. And then that's the fastest way to get smart on what's actually happening.
Paul, question I didn't ask.
No, it's. I think the most. I think it's a kind of a variant on what Malcolm was just saying, right? It's like, what do I do? The question is like, what do I do as an individual? If I'm listening to this, and I'm listening to, the four of us talk about, a really hot topic, right? There's not a lack of information or, opinions about AI at this moment. So what do I do about it? I think it's a variant of what Malcolm was saying. Is just make it personal. Like if you're spending more time every day brushing your teeth than you are learning and applying these new tools, it's a problem, and recognize it as a problem. It's just that easy. If you're not like, depending on how many times a day you brush your teeth, right? 15 minutes a day, right? If you're not spending 15 minutes a day, like using AI somehow, then you're not going to be able to fully kind of internalize what the power of these systems are. It's got to be demystified, right? And that's on me. That's on you, right? That's not something that you can point to the company and go, well, that company should do this, or Satya Nadella should do this for us. You've got to take personal responsibility for getting close to these machines and figuring out how they work for you. And then as a leader of a company, extrapolate that to the work that your firm does. I think that's a super, super important thing, is to just make it as personal as possible, right? Regardless of what the tool is. Use an if it's more than 50 words, like in our, what my own little rule, like if it's more than 25 or 30 words, I work with a robot, right? I say, how is this, right? Just as simple as that. Building the pattern, right, to be able to, and the muscle and the habit, the tiny habit of being able to work with a machine every day. I think that's really becoming more and more of a critical skill, and particularly if you're in a leadership position, right? I think students are doing this. Like if you could talk to any college student, they're doing this already, right? We're the last generation that is going to be, right, an AI kind of immigrant, if you will. We're learning the language, right? We have to teach ourselves how to act in this new kind of environment, and I think that's the responsibility that's all on us, and others who are listening to this cast, right? That are watching this, that are like, what do I do, right? I get it. I know the numbers, right? I see the research from McKinsey and all these other places, right? What do I do about it? Phone a bot, right? If you're not trying it every day, you're not going to build the muscles and the mindset that we all need going into this next evolution.
Many employers already complain that bring your own AI to work, it becomes widespread, right? People use their own tools, people use their own same devices, but completely different platforms without even asking for permission anymore. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's why, and so the other question, why is that, right? I mean, we saw that we talked about the cloud, right? People were doing that, right? People were taking their corporate credit card and going straight to the cloud, and then corporate IT caught up. right?
Yep.
Materials, the machines matured, the legal constructs matured, security matured, and it was this amazing value unlock that's still ongoing to this day. AI is going to go follow the same process. It's already starting to follow the same process, but it's going to go 50 or 100 times faster.
And Irene, just a quick thing on that, Irene, BYO AI is real. But companies are taking very different approaches to it. Some, again, being lawyer-led, as I was saying earlier, going, ooh, this is risk. Let's stomp it out wherever it exists. Others are being more thoughtful and saying, you know what? No, none of us centrally can figure this out. But the people who are closest to the work are voting with their keyboards.
Exactly.
And so let's harvest that. Let's actually open source it, if you will, this research across all of our employees and say, you know, role by role, what tools are you using? How much productivity are you getting? And then you can pull that mainstream across everybody in that function. So it's interesting to see how people deal, or firms are taking very different approaches to BYO AI.
Incredible, incredible. Gentlemen, time is flying. I enjoy our conversation immensely. Let's get together in some time in the future, because we all, I think, in shock and awe what we're seeing. Okay, we're all part of the process, and to Paul's point, we are voluntarily part of the process. We gotta be, otherwise we don't want to be sad animals left behind, you know, in the evolutionary race. With that, gentlemen, for conclusion, okay, to leave our audience with few takeaways. We touched so many angles. We had an incredible insight thanks to all the years, decades of experiences, combined wisdom in this virtual room. Ben, few takeaways to remember this conversation by.
The phrase that the three of us have used, I continue to use for quite a few years. I think it's still, you know, completely appropriate and relevant, and it really is the sort of short form version of what Malcolm and Paul were both saying. Is a phrase that a guy called Kevin Kelly, who was the founding editor of Wired magazine, came up with a few years ago. And he said simply, the future of your work is X plus AI, and X is whatever it is you do. Add AI to that, and that's how you get to the next performance threshold of what it is you do. So maybe it's X plus agent now is the future of your work.
Paul, few takeaways maybe.
Yeah, I think for you know, we started to talk about what does it mean for the enterprise? What does agentic AI mean for the enterprise? And I think there are some very clear steps that are emerging. There are early adopters that are showing the way, right? Pay attention, right? It usually starts with software, right? That's a great place to start. The legal constructs, by and large, do exist, right? There are companies now that are coming into maturity that can go into the enterprise and say, we can help you with this, right? That's and have some fun with it. I mean, this is it's a really exciting time to be in business and the business of technology, which is only going to get more and more important, right? Software is only going to get more and more important. Technology and every experience and process is going to be more important. And what could be more fun than that? I mean, if you're into business, doing business well, this is a fantastic time to be doing this.
Malcolm, in conclusion.
Yeah, I learned I need to brush my teeth, or spend more time brushing my teeth. So that's a big takeaway.
That's a great learning from this hour, for sure.
That was my goal.
Great learning.
Great learning.
Just two simple ones. One is, I already talked about it earlier a couple of times. Find something you understand deeply. Start using agents around that so you get it. The second is look at the firm where you currently work and say, I'm going to create a startup tomorrow, and its job is to put my existing company out of business. And I'm going to do that by leveraging agents. Take that mindset with everything. And I think these intellectual barriers that currently exist will come crumbling down pretty fast.
Wonderful. Gentlemen, thank you so very much for your time today. This is incredible. I've learned a lot. I'm going to start brushing my teeth just after this session for sure. That's the main learning. No, this is a key. I'm kidding. So point is incredible. Thank you so very much for your time. I hope to talk to you in this studio again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.